Shalom, Erev Tov, and welcome to a very, very special event tonight where our very own Melissa Briggs, one of the Christian ambassadors to EMUNAH Israel, and I know you all know her and love her, but we are really honored to have Melissa actually do a lesson. Many of you know, and many of you are a part of her Hebrew online course for Christians, and she is amazing. And she's lived in Israel. She's been here for 5 years. She took lessons she was 5 years a student at the infamous Hebrew University. And I guess that's where you learned all of your Ivrit and then you lived here. So we are truly honored and blessed to have Melissa give us a lesson and introduce us to the special language of Hebrew, the holiness of the language, how it's an action impact language. And Melissa, I'm going to turn it all over to you. And again, thank you for doing this amazing event tonight.
Thank you, Ruth. It's an honor to be here with you all. Thank you so much for hosting this. And I'm going to share my screen and we are going to jump in to the beauty and the richness of the Hebrew language. I know some of you have taken my lessons already and some of you are brand new. So hopefully there'll be something for everybody today. Hopefully you can share my screen now and we will get started. Wonderful. So at this time of day, we normally have the Christian Friends of EMUNAH Israel webinar. You can find on the screen here the YouTube handle to find the recordings from our previous episodes of the webinar. And I really encourage you to subscribe there because we'll have more content landing there in the next few weeks. And we do plan to have our next webinar on the first Tuesday in February at the same time, same place, the same link even. So I hope that all of you will join us again then. And I have been teaching Hebrew language for 16 years. I lived in Israel actually for 2 years. Stephen, my husband, lived there for closer to 5 years. And it was such a wonderful experience. I call Jerusalem the city of love. Sometimes Paris gets credit for that, but it was where I met my wonderful husband and had such a fantastic experience of being immersed in the language and the culture and all the rich history and everything that's going on there. And this is a sample similar to the lesson one that I do in my Hebrew courses. So as I mentioned, I've been teaching Hebrew for about 16 years. I used to do just in-person group lessons, and then over time it's more one-on-one lessons, usually in person, and then a switch to Zoom. And about 2 years ago, we were in the process of getting our foster license to foster again once we had moved to the US. And I realized that I was giving this lesson one to students over and over throughout the day, individual students, and it really felt like it was time to record the lesson so that students could watch them in their own time. It could be more flexible for everybody. And so this is a little sample of lesson one from my Explore Hebrew, but it isn't just that. I've added in some other things, especially about the beautiful Hebrew word, emunah, and the richness around that word. So stay tuned for a little bit more than what is found in lesson one of Explore Hebrew. So the way that I like to do my Hebrew lessons, it is a mixture of biblical and modern Hebrew together. Usually if you take a Hebrew class, it's either just biblical or just modern. And usually in a Hebrew class, they spend most of the first lesson just learning the alphabet. But I like to split things up a little bit. And in each of my Hebrew lessons, I'll do a little bit of conversation, a little bit of learning to read with the letters and the vowels and the syllables and all of that. And then there'll be some biblical Hebrew word study, and then also some grammar, looking at how we conjugate verbs or how adjectives and nouns work together. And so hopefully there'll be a little taste of all of that for you here today. And if you were in Israel meeting a Hebrew speaker, one of the ways that you can ask somebody their name, and this is a great basic vocab to learn, is that you could ask a man, if you're speaking to a man, mi ata, mi ata. That first little word there, mi, is actually one that you should recognize from the Hebrew name Michael. Michael means who is like God. So that might help you remember that one. Mi is who. And then in English, really, we just have one way to ask you, whether we're talking to a man or to a woman. But in Hebrew, they have separate ways to say you for a male and for a female, whether you're talking to a male or talking to a female. And this is actually quite useful because sometimes if you hear somebody talking and saying you or hey you, you don't necessarily know exactly who they're talking to, and you have a little bit more of a clue with the masculine and feminine distinction there. There's also ways in Hebrew to say you plural. That wasn't something that we had in Chicago where I grew up, but I do live in the Nashville area now, and they do have a way to say you plural here with the y'all. So this is just you singular though. So if I'm speaking to a man, let's say the man in the picture here, I could ask him, mi ata, mi ata, who you. So you might notice that there's actually a verb missing from the sentence here, or from the question. There's no verb in the sentence. And in Hebrew, we don't use the verb of being in the present tense. We don't have is or are or am. So if you're coming across a sentence, a question that doesn't have a verb in it, it is inferred that you're supposed to, that the verb of being is there. And if we're translating it to English, or we would add in is or are or am, depending on who the subject of the sentence is. So if we're translating this exactly, it can sound almost like a little bit caveman-esque to say, who you, I, Melissa, but it doesn't sound, it sounds good to Hebrew ears. It is the correct way to say it. So if I'm speaking to a man, or if you have men on the call here and I wanted to ask your name, I could say, mi ata, mi ata. Who you? Who are you? But if I'm speaking to a woman, I'm going to say mi'at, mi'at, mi'at. And if I am, sorry, just letting a few more people into the call here. So if I'm speaking, there's just a gender neutral way then to answer back, to say who you are. One of the ways to introduce yourself is to say, Ani Melissa. Or even if it's a man talking, they could say, Ani David, Ani Avraham, Ani. So to all the men on the call, I'm going to ask you, Mi ata. And you would answer back, Ani Robin, Ani Paul, Ani Tom. And now we'll ask the ladies, Mi at. I would say Ani Melissa, or you might say Ani Sarah, Ani Hannah, Ani Ruth. Okay, so now you can take a turn asking me what my name is. And you want to make sure to use the female, mi at, mi at. So like I mentioned in my Hebrew lessons, I start each of them with building on some conversation. So we learn how to ask somebody what their name is, where they're from, how they are, where they live, what they study, that kind of thing. And so we'll learn a little bit more conversation here. If I wanted to then, after I've met somebody, maybe you've told me your name, I would say Naim Me'od. Naim Me'od. And this literally means pleasant, very, or very pleasant, but it's the Hebrew way to say nice to meet you to someone. And this word Naim is actually from the same root word as Naomi, that biblical name that means pleasant one. And it is the adjective, it means pleasant. So after I would say Ani Melissa, you could say Naim Me'od. And then back to that, somebody would probably say Toda or Toda Rabah. And I'm not sure how many of you have been to Israel before, probably a lot of you, but I'm sure that you learned how to say Toda, thank you, or Toda Rabah, thank you very much. And so Rabah is much, but Me'od is very. So hang on to that one because I think it's going to turn up on another slide here in just a minute. Or here it is. So there are different ways, just like in English, we might ask somebody, how are you? How's it going? What's up? What's new? One of the ways in Hebrew to ask somebody how they're doing is to say, manishma, manishma. And I like this way because you don't have to change it or conjugate it all, whether you're speaking to a man or to a woman, it's just the same either way. Manishma. And there are different answers that we can give. We could say tov, tov, good. And something that I love so much about Hebrew is just the rich biblical heritage around so many words, the rich spiritual meaning and connections with so many words. And obviously, people use this word tov or use the word tov in Israel or good in English all the time to describe things, but actually, this has this rich heritage all the way back to Genesis chapter 1 when God is creating things each day. He's saying that they are tov. And this is actually a word that I did a deep dive of a Hebrew word study on recently because it actually started when we were moving house this summer and we were having to pick out carpet. We moved into a house that didn't have any flooring. So we went to the store to pick out some carpet, and there was three options at Home Depot. You could pick good, better, or best, which I thought was quite funny because it made you think that the good one actually was like not very good quality. And the better one might be like okay, and the best one was probably actually the one that is, really fit for purpose. And it made me think about how, God, this word tov is used to describe God in the Bible, but the way that we use good in our English language now, where there is so much hyperbole and mass marketing, superlatives of this is amazing, this is the best, this is fantastic, and we've really lost sight of this beautiful meaning of the word good. And actually, when you're looking at Genesis 1 and doing a word study of this word, really it speaks of something being created for a purpose and it functioning in accordance with that purpose it was designed for, and also associated with it being life-giving and beneficial. And yeah, the main thrust of this word, if you do a deep dive into biblical Hebrew word study, is about a thing being well designed and functioning according to that God-given design. And so there's so much more to the word tov than just the English idea of good, which really is just I don't know, the way that we use good, it can be just, oh, it's passable or it's fine. And if I don't know, let's say I was writing a Hebrew word study article and I showed it to my husband to ask him what he thought. If he just said, yeah, it's good, I would think, oh, it's, maybe it's not actually that good, and would expect a bigger word than that. But actually, this word tov is something so beautiful, and it's so amazing that God is tov. And so much more than that, of course, as well. So we have tov, or if we want to intensify that, we can say tov me'od. Remember, na'im me'od meant very pleasant or nice to meet you, and tov me'od is very good. And if you're not doing well, you can say lo tov, lo tov. And probably the most Israeli answer you could get is beseder, beseder. Probably a lot of you have done a Passover Seder in the past. Who's done a Passover Seder before? Yes, fantastic. Yes, Ruth has definitely done a Passover Seder. So, Seder is a Hebrew word that means order. And the Passover meal is done in a certain order with certain glasses of wine, certain prayers, certain readings done at different times, certain songs. And so when we say Beseder, it means in order. So this is a way of like saying fine or okay. So I'll ask you now, Manishma. טוב, טוב מאוד, לא טוב, בסדר. Yofi, and now you can ask me how I'm doing. טוב, תודה. Right, now we are going to talk a little bit about one of my favorite things about the Hebrew language. I'll probably keep saying that because there is so much goodness, so much beauty in this language. And I know it can seem really daunting to think about learning the Hebrew language because it has a different alphabet. It seems so different than English. But the Hebrew language is actually so well designed. It's so well organized. It's so much more logical than English. I really have a lot of sympathy for anybody that tries to learn English as a second language because English has all these different influences from Latin and Greek root words and Germanic root words, all sorts of things, and so many exceptions to the rule. But in Hebrew, there are far, far less exceptions to the rule. And then often, if something is an exception to the rule, all the things that are that exception are functioning in that same way. So there is a lot of order to it. And the whole Hebrew language centers around the idea of a root letter system. And so you might see in this word family that you're noticing three consonants over and over again. Almost every word in the Hebrew language has three primary root letters. Some have four, some have two, but almost all of them have three. And all the words with those same three root letters in that same order are grouped together in a family of words. And there is a shared topic within that family of words. If you were to read out the list of all the words that have those same root letters, you would notice a theme in each of those groupings. And here's just one example of a family of words. It's not exhaustive of all the words in this family, but just a little sample to see how this root letter system functions. So the top one we have Sefer. This means a book or a scroll. We have Sipur, which is a story. We have Lesaper, which is a recounting or a telling of a story, a verb there. Then we have Sifriya, which means library, and Sipara, which means a telling or a recounting of a story. So all of those words in English, you wouldn't know just from hearing them that they go together. You wouldn't, if you didn't know English and you heard the words book, library, story, recount, you wouldn't necessarily know that they go together. But in Hebrew, they look similar, they sound similar, they have these same root letters that are sticking out. And so, usually, if you're learning Hebrew, you learn the word book pretty early on in your journey, sefer. And then when you come across another word with those same root letters, you definitely have an advantage or a step in the right direction to try to guess maybe from context clues what this word might be, or to add other words to your vocabulary and say, oh, yeah, okay, now Sefer was book, and now I'm seeing Sipur. That's a story, and I can connect those words together. And this is especially important and beautiful when you're doing biblical Hebrew word studies, because often within the family of words, we're getting a lot of help to understand a certain word that we're studying or looking at, especially words that are more abstract in English, words like faith and hope and love, which if you are trying to draw or picture those words in English, it might be difficult to know how to do so. But in Hebrew, we have this advantage that we can look within the family of words at other words, and we often get a helpful visual picture. So I'm going to explain to you what I mean in a little bit when we dig into a couple of those words like hope and faith. And I'm sure most of you are aware that Hebrew reads the opposite way to English. So if I'm reading Hebrew, I'm going to start at the right-hand side here, and this would be the first letter that I'm reading, and I would read right to left. So the opposite way, and I meant to grab a Hebrew book here to show you, but Hebrew books open the opposite way, even Hebrew DVD covers or Hebrew journals. Ruth will show us something. Look at there, you can see Ruth, hopefully. There, she has a Hebrew book to show us, opening the opposite way. So I think Hebrew English dictionaries are fun because the English side opens at the regular English way, and the Hebrew side opens at the Hebrew way, and both end the alphabet there in the middle. So that is, these are what the consonants look like. So in Hebrew, we first learned the consonants, and then the vowels pointings were added later. So if we were to look at, for example, here's a biblical text, it is going to be the consonants that are written out here. And in the 600s, the Masoretic scribes added a vowel pointing system um, onto the letter. So if we look here, we have Genesis 1:1. And the big like block letters, those are our consonants. And then the little dots, and lines that are under the letter. Sometimes they're just above, like here's a vowel that's above, but most of them go under the letters. Those show us what vowel sounds to put into the words. And something a little bit unique about the way that I organize my courses is that for level one, I have level one and level two and level three available. And for level one, we memorize right at the start, we'll memorize Genesis 1:1. And I use that as a framework for learning the different parts of speech in Hebrew. I know Hebrew can seem daunting again because the letters are different. It feels so foreign compared to English. But I find after students have memorized Genesis 1:1, and then as we go and we start to learn the definite article, how to say the, and we learn the conjunction, how to say and we're learning prepositions, how to say in, we're learning the plural endings that we put onto words. I find once they already have Genesis 1:1 memorized, it's like a set of hooks where we can hang the different parts of speech as we learn. Like, remember the way we say in is bay. And that's what, we saw that in Genesis 1:1, or the way to say and in Hebrew is they, and you know that from Genesis 1:1. Remember, here's the verse, and there's where we find and in it. So here is what it looks like in Hebrew. And again, we read from right to left that way. And probably some of the words in this will even sound familiar to you. I'll say it and you can repeat it after me. Bereshit, bara, Elohim, et, hashemayim, ve'et, haaretz. So I'm sure there you probably recognize one of the Hebrew names of God here, Elohim. And then also at the bottom, maybe you've heard the one of the Hebrew newspapers is called Haaretz, which means in that context, it means the land. It also can mean the earth, like it does here in Genesis 1:1. So that is a fun and I find really helpful part of my level one Hebrew course. And just checking the time here. We're doing well. Okay. So normally we do more of this in my lesson one, but I want to save time for some Hebrew word study. So we're going to go through this a little bit quicker than normal, but I want to give you a taste of what it's like to actually learn to read and write some Hebrew letters. And if you have a pen and paper, you can try to copy these down. If you don't, you can just watch and that's totally fine too. So the very first letter of the Hebrew alphabet is the Aleph. Basically looks like a fancy X here, Aleph. And uh, not all of the letters in the Hebrew alphabet are so confusing, but Aleph is a unique one because it actually makes no sound. It is a silent letter. What you end up hearing is the vowel sound that's connected to this silent letter. And you might say, why on earth would you have a letter that's always silent in Hebrew? And that's a big discussion. Just two kind of quick answers to that is one, in Hebrew, we don't have the vowels just floating in thin air. A vowel belongs to a consonant. A vowel song belongs to a consonant. And if I want to start out a word with a vowel sound, I put it with a silent letter like Aleph. So if I wanted to say Abraham, starting with an ah sound there, I would start it with an Aleph, and under the Aleph, I would have that A type vowel sound, the ah. And then also, it's important to keep the silent letters in a word, even though you're not hearing them, because they are part of that root letter system. So a word that has an aleph, that aleph will be part of the root letter. So it's important to keep that, to see the root letters as well. Okay, we're going to go on to the second word, or the second letter rather, and it is a bet. A bet. To draw a bet, usually start along the top and curve down, and then there's a straight line. You leave a little bit of space here. This is a bet. Normally I have a tool to draw it for you, but we're just going a little bit quicker today. Originally, all the Hebrew letters were like little pictographs, and they were meant to look like little pictures that would help you remember that sound. So the original bet, which looked a little bit different than this, was supposed to look like a house. Bet or bait or bite is the Hebrew word for house. And so when you would see this symbol, it would remind you of a house, and you would know that house is bite or bet. And so this is making a B sound, like the beginning of the word for house. And when we have this dot in the middle, it's making a B sound, bet, B. And the bet has like a twin sister letter. When it has the dot in the middle, it's making the B sound. And when there's no dot in the middle, we call it vet, and it makes a V sound. You probably noticed before that the bet and the vet, or the B and the V sound, are connected to each other in Hebrew because, like I just said, you've probably heard a Hebrew speaker say the name Abraham, Avraham. Trying to remember the quote. I think there was something where Trump was talking about the Abraham Accords, and he was like, "I like how Netanyahu says it, the Avraham Accords." So in Hebrew, uh, some things that we're saying with a B, they're actually saying with a V because at that place in the word, the dot has come out of it. So now it's become a vet and a V sound. Right. So now we are ready to read our first Hebrew word for those of you that this is your first introduction to Hebrew. And my children, their first word when they were babies was dada, pretty typical first word for English speaking babies. And I've heard that the most common first word that Hebrew speaking babies will say is this word. So it feels very appropriate to make this the first word that we're going to sound out. Um, and we're going to read from right to left. The way that we read Hebrew is consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel, consonant. And if the word is longer, you just keep following that pattern. So we're going to see what we remember so far. So what is this letter on the right-hand side? We have the aleph. And what sound does an aleph make? Yes, this is my trick question. It makes no sound. It's totally silent. But what we are going to hear is underneath here, we have the dash with this dash, which makes an ah sound, an A-type vowel, ah. So far we have ah. And what is the middle consonant here? I see some of you mouthing bet. And what sound? B. We know that it's the bet because it does have the dot in the middle. It would be vet if it didn't have the dot. And because of where the bet is falling in the sentence, this is something I won't go into totally explaining why, but sometimes in the middle of a word, if you're getting a bet, it's being doubled if there's a vowel sound right before it. So this is actually two B sounds. And then underneath, we have another vowel. And this vowel actually makes the same exact sound as this. It's another ah sound. So far we have ah, ba. And then what's the last consonant? Silent. Okay, so we have abba, abba, abba. Our first Hebrew word, the Hebrew word for dad or daddy. And let's learn two more letters and sound out a couple more Hebrew words. And then we will jump to some biblical Hebrew word studies, especially about emunah. So here we have the gimel. The gimel makes a g sound. In English, our G can make a couple different sounds, but in Hebrew, their G sound, the gimel, is a g, g. So we start from the top and draw a curved line down, and come and draw like a kickstand. We have the gimel, g. Okay, so let's sound out this word now that we know the gimel. So reading from right to left, we have the gimel, g. And what sound did this vowel make? Ah. And what's the last consonant here? The vet, the v. Remember, there's no dot in it, so it's vet. So we have g, a, v, gav, gav, the Hebrew word for back, gav. Nice. We'll do one more letter and two more words. So next we have the dalet, da, da, as in dog, da. So let's try to sound out. This is a dalet too. This is actually a better font of what a dalet looks like. A dalet is usually straight across the top. Then you come in a little bit and at a right angle, draw another line down. And the lines are about equal length. So this is the dalet, da. And the vowel, again, was a. And what was this letter? Gimel, ga. So we have da, a, g, dag, dag. So you might recognize this word because it's actually found in the Bible. It talks about the Philistines worshiping Dagon, the fish god. The Philistines were a seafaring people and they worshiped uh, a fish god, and it's the same root word. We also, from this word get words to do with fishermen and the verb to fish and the short, simple word for a fish itself, dag. Okay, our last word that we're going to do, this is a biblical Hebrew name, a man's name, one of the sons of Yaakov, Jacob. Okay, so the dot might be confusing here. The gimel sometimes has a dot too, but the dot in the gimel does not change the name or the sound of the letter. This is still just that simple g sound. We talk more about the dots in the lessons, but for here, just know that this is a g sound. Ah. And what's the last letter here? Dalet, da. So God, God. One of the 12 tribes, God. Yofi. Okay. Well, there you go. That's how we read Hebrew, learning the letters one by one, learning a few vowels at a time, and then practicing them. I love to especially put in biblical Hebrew words. I feel like it's very satisfying for new Hebrew students to be able to read out places and names of people they recognize from the Bible. So I have a lot of that in my Hebrew courses. And okay, so now on with the balance of our time here, I wanted to dig into some Hebrew word studies. I feel that it is so beneficial and such a blessing to Christians to even understand a little bit of Hebrew. Maybe you've done this lesson and you think, okay, I'm not sure I have the time or patience or desire to learn the whole language with all the letters and the alphabet and all of that. But the Bible was originally written in Hebrew. Certain words were chosen because of the original meaning of those words, the intent of the authors to describe what God is like, what he wants from us and for us. And sometimes in our translations of the Bible, we can then put our own modern Western ideas of what those words, what those topics mean onto the biblical text, when really there is a different, richer, usually way more beautiful meaning to that word. A great example is the Hebrew word tikva. I'm sure you've all heard tikva. Hopefully you've seen some of the Hatikva Film Trust films that Stephen and I are involved with, like America and the Israel Effect. But also, I'm sure you know it from the national anthem of Israel, Ha-Tikva is the hope, Tikva. Our modern English Western idea of hope is basically wishful thinking, optimistic thinking. It is just a nice thought, and there's no real strength behind the word. It's generally considered to be a positive thing, to be a hopeful person or an optimistic person. But where we find this biblical Hebrew word tikva, it means expectant, waiting for a guaranteed outcome. There is so much strength behind this word, and that is something we can really miss in the English. I have here a few Bible verses where we find this word, and I find that when students learn the meaning of some of these words like tikva, and then they go back and are reading the scriptures with this adjusted definition of the word, it is so inspiring and so encouraging. So I hope that you find that too. So some of these verses are going to have the verb. Oops, went forward too quick. I'm going to try to move my view of your pictures here so I can read these better. Right, so we have here at the top, and there is tikva in your end, says the Lord, that your children shall come again to their own border. There is this we should have this expectant waiting for a guaranteed outcome. And of course, in the last 100 years, there have been so many of the children of Israel, people of Israel, that have returned again to their own borders. That's from Jeremiah 31:17. The second one here, but they that hope slash wait expectantly, and there that's the verb form of tikva, which is kavah. They that wait or hope expectantly upon the Lord shall renew their strength. That's from Isaiah 40 or Proverbs 23:18. Surely there is a future, and your tikva, your guaranteed hope, will not be cut off. And of course, God Himself ultimately is our tikva hope, where our expectation should be, which is such a secure place for it. My soul, you wait only upon God, for my tikva, my expectation is from Him, or Psalm 71:5. For you are my tikva, O Lord God. You are my trust from my youth. There's so much more to say about that word. We could easily spend 45 minutes just on tikva, but I hope that gave you a little taste. But now I want to, and I think we'll leave this for time here, but just to say very quickly, sometimes we can be missing things if we're just looking at our English translations. I wrote an article a while back about the Hebrew words, plural, 8 of them for waiting. I was listening to a sermon and the pastor was going through reading all these verses, mainly from the Psalms about waiting. And I had my Hebrew English Bible there looking them up as he was talking. And I was so surprised. I was like, oh, that's a different word, and that's a different word, and that's a different word. And there's, not all of them are kavah hopes, things that we can wait for with certainty. Some of them are maybe more labor intensive or agony and waiting. Some of them are more of a quiet waiting, or lingering. So anyways, that's something that I look into in one of the lessons in my Explore Hebrew courses. But now to emunah. Emunah is the Hebrew word for faith. And something that I love about Hebrew, Ruth alluded to it at the beginning about how Hebrew is such an active language. All these root letters have a primary verb, a root verb that they're going back to. And I've heard it described, which I think is a really poignant or really helpful way to put it, is that English language can be more about describing things. Like if I ask you to describe a pencil, you might say, oh, it's usually yellow and pointy and maybe an eraser or rubber at one end. But a Hebrew speaker might say, you write with it, or the focus is more on the action. And Amuna is a great example of a word that in English we can make really passive or really just like something that's happening in your head. If I'm thinking about faith or belief from a typical Western English perspective, really we think of that usually as a mental assent to a certain set of ideas, something that's all happening in your head. But this is so different than the biblical and Hebraic way of looking at it. Faith is not just something in your head, it's meant to be shown forth through your actions. Faith and faithfulness are the same word, and it can also be translated truth and loyalty, this active faith that I see much more about what you actually believe through your actions. If I was to take a look, say, at your bank account or your calendar, how you're actually spending your time and your resources, than just by hearing what it is that you say that you believe. Our faith is shown in our actions. And that is really the heart of Emunah and the reason that it has this name. Ruth was speaking a little bit at the beginning. Emunah Israel is this organization in Israel, a not-for-profit charity that looks after tens of thousands of Israel's most vulnerable children and families every year with lots of different programs. It has 5 children's homes where children who have been removed from their family by court order due to severe abuse or neglect or abandonment or maybe being orphaned, that they're taken into these children's homes. But there's also lots of programs to try to keep families together, supporting and training parents and connecting them with the resources that they need. So we'll come back a little bit to that. But the idea is that the Jewish women that founded Emunah wanted to put their faith into action by doing something about what they believe, believing that life is precious, that God wants us to care for the vulnerable and the needy and the orphan and the widow. And EMUNAH does those actions and has those beliefs, which is true EMUNAH. And so these are some of the ways that emunah might be translated: faith, faithfulness, truth, fidelity, steadfastness, steadiness, which is interesting, firmness, stable, done in a trustworthy manner. And we're going to look at a couple verses that use this word in a minute, but it's also from the same root family, very connected to the word emet, which means truth. And this is really interesting too, because our modern, postmodern Western culture has just done a terrible job of separating faith and truth and just saying, you do you, you have your truth, you believe whatever you want to. But biblically, our faith is supposed to be in the truth. They're basically the same word. They're not supposed to be disconnected from one another. And it is also, you'll see on another slide here in a minute, uh, from the same root word, we also get the word for pillars and the verb to support. And I like to think of faith and truth of these pillars in our life that are supporting our life, our relationship with God, with one another. Another word in the same family of words that you definitely all know, even if you have no other Hebrew experience, is amen, which is um, which is really interesting how closely it's related to these words for truth and faith, because sometimes in Christian circles we can use amen just as more of like a social cue to let somebody know that we're done, or people might say it to something someone else has said kind of out of politeness. But really, when we're saying amen, it's like saying, this is true, I believe it, so be it. A powerful word that we can use too casually, I think. It comes from this root verb to be faithful or to be trustworthy. And of course, ultimately, God is the one who has perfect emunah. He is perfectly faithful, perfectly trustworthy. And I love, love, love looking at the families of words with the same root letters and seeing these connections that there are between words that we wouldn't necessarily group these words together, but when you stop and think about it, you can see that there is a connection there. We have the different conjugations of aman are translated in the Bible as to believe, doorposts or pillars, again about supporting, endure, establish, faithful, firm, fulfilled, guardians, has assurance, have faith, lasting. Word for nurse, the word for foster parent is from this root verb, which is a cool connection with emunah as well. My husband and I are foster parents, and so I love that connection. To put your trust, reliable and verified. And here we go. Let's look at a few verses now that have emunah in the text, and it might not be exactly how we would expect to find it. Exodus 17:12. So remember, there's this battle going on, and Moses' hands were heavy. Then they took a stone and they put it under him, and he sat on it. And Aaron and Hur supported his hands, one on one side, one on the other. Thus his hands were emunah until the sun set. So there it's uh, this meaning in this context about this steadiness. And it just reminds me of how steady the Lord is, how secure and stable the Lord is, and also about, faith and truth should be steady things. They shouldn't be things that are everybody's having their own version of. We also find emunah in Psalm 33:4, which says, "For the word of the Lord is upright, and all of his work is done in emunah." So you might want to grab your translation of the Bible and see which word they translated this verse with. Some of them say faithfulness, truth, or reliability. And this word emunah encapsulates all of these things. It's this active faith and faithfulness, things done in a truthful, reliable, steady, stable manner. And all of the Lord's work is emunah. And definitely the work that Emunah, the organization in Israel, is doing the Lord's work, caring for the orphan, caring for the widow, caring for needy children. We also find the verb form of emunah, which is aman, in Exodus 14:31. And when the Israelites saw the mighty hand of the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and put their aman in him and in Moses, his servant. And I think this verse is interesting. It reminds us that, we should have our faith, our trust in something reliable. And ultimately, the Lord is the most reliable. And that's what the Egyptians saw. And, or that's what the Israelites saw in the Lord's actions, his faithfulness, his trustworthiness, that he is so worthy of our aman. And yeah, I think I'll end it there. I know we like to end promptly at 12:45, which we've just come to. There's a QR code here. I'll put the link in the chat in just a minute too. The link is explorehebrew.thinkific.com. And there, if you use coupon code, I'm going to update it in just a second that today, if you use the EMUNAH code, you'll get $100 off the Hebrew courses, either level 1 or level 2, or you can buy them both together, which is already discounted. And then when you add that EMUNAH code, it's a very good value. And today, if you buy them, you get $100 off plus a $30 donation will be made to EMUNAH Israel for every use of the coupon code. If you don't do it today, the EMUNAH code will go back to its regular status of being $70 off the courses and a $30 donation be made to EMUNAH and the amazing work that they do for the children and family of Israel there. So in just a second, when I get out of the screen share, and I just wanted to again remind you that we do these regular webinars. Our next one is planned for the first Tuesday in February, but you definitely want to get on our email list. You can email the email down here, which will come to Stephen and I, Christian friends at worldemunah.org, or Ruth at worldemunah.org to make sure you get on our email list. We provide monthly prayer guide to pray for Israel and for Emunah and the children and families of Israel. And Ruth also does a wonderful weekly devotional that's about the Torah reading for that week and how it connects to putting your faith into action. It's called the 5 Minutes of Faith. So you definitely want to get on the email list for that, for the prayer points, and then you'll hear the updates about when we're doing the webinar. And I will hand it back to Ruth, and I'm just going to put a link in the chat for you. And I hope that we'll see you all that first Tuesday of February for our next webinar.
Melissa, you are fantastic, and I learned so much myself from your course. And thank you. I'm sure I speak on behalf of everybody. Your wisdom and your knowledge and your commitment to both Israel and to the Christian and Jewish communities is amazing. And on behalf of Emunah and all of us in Israel, Todah, Shabbat Shalom for this coming Shabbat, and Shavua Tov to everyone. Melissa, we'll see you all February 3rd, God willing. Have a good one.
Thank you. I'm
Bye
just
bye.
putting the link to the Hebrew course in the chat if you're looking for it there. And great.
Okay,
Thank you all.
shalom. Shalom.
Toda. Toda.